Hey, have you ever felt that things were so bad that you had nowhere to go but up? Well, that is the story of my guest, Ted Lynch. Ted was in prison, and he said the Lord literally put him on his back so he could look up. Ted is a Nashville recording artist whose life has taken many twists and turns, to say the least. He was in very destructive relationships, including one with his father. Ted, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Now, before we talk about how you ended up in prison, let's go back your childhood. You did believe in God?
Yeah, I went to church as a child and served on the altar, and I remember watching the priest, bless the communion. And I remember being on my knees, being a first server and ringing the bells, and I looked at him and I said to myself, I'd like to be a priest. And then my shoulders kind of shrunk, and my thought was, but I'd like to get married.
So you had a little dilemma right on there.
I did.
Now, talk about your family life, because a part of your story is a really rough relationship with your dad.
Yeah, I tell folks that I grew up in a home that went to church, but I didn't grow up in a Christian home. And, you can go to the garage and it doesn't make you a mechanic, and you can go to the hospital, it won't make you a nurse or doctor, and you can necessarily go to church and not be a Christian. Well, I didn't have, I had an interest in God, but I didn't have that relationship with God. And my dad was an alcoholic, and I was, I loved my dad. He was a picture of strength. I loved the smell of him. He had big hands, and, but my dad was a worker, and we didn't spend a lot of time with him unless we were piling wood or doing the garden or even haying or things like that. Anyhow, as things progressed, I found myself at the end of his knuckles and the end of his belt a lot, and I really began to resent him, and it just progressed from that. I started doing really bad in school, and that's where my life really spiraled. As I was older, I got into more like drugs and alcohol and things like that.
So things were not good on the home front. Was it anger that you had inside, that you started pursuing drugs, you got into trouble, violence, those kinds of things?
I think I felt lonely, even though there were 6 siblings, and I felt alone. I can't explain that totally, but yeah, and then this anger and this hardness towards my father took place. My heart became very calloused, and it just got to the point where I wasn't going to listen to him anymore, and I wouldn't listen to him. I just made a decision. I always tell people today that you need to be careful. If there's any voice, you need to be careful. What you listen to, it's your own. Mm-hmm. And I remember as a young man, a teenager, saying, nobody cares. Why should I?
So, you were believing a lie.
I was. That's a total lie. Because God cares, and Jesus cares, and people care. And, but that really put me down the wrong road big time.
So you go down this road where you're into vandalism, violence, alcohol use. So what was it that actually finally landed you in prison?
Well, yeah, it started with, petty stuff, slashing tires and breaking things, and, I was fortunate. High-speed chase with the police. I was able to get away a lot and with things, and petty crime, stealing at the mall. Anyways, when I went away to community college in Woodstock, New Brunswick, I was a binge drinker. I didn't just drink that night. I get up the next day and I hit her again, and the next day after that. And
was this to dull the pain, Ted? Or?
I think so. Yeah, I didn't care if I lived or died. I really didn't. And I had 3 of my close friends were killed in one summer. Guys I went to the camp with, and guys that I partied with, and traveled the roads with. I was in Woodstock, as I mentioned, and I went to the bar, and it was probably the 3rd or 4th night that I was hitting her. I was a binge drinker, and I took every drug I had ever seen. And I was coming home from the bar, and I met this guy, or he was an acquaintance of an acquaintance. These people it wasn't necessarily my friends, but we decided to break into the college, and it wasn't the first time I broke into a place. But this time we set off a silent alarm. And the next morning, after being arrested, was probably about the worst day of my life. I woke up in a jail cell, laying on a cement slab.
Okay, we're going to take a break because we're going to pick it up as you're on this cement slab and what happens in that prison cell when we come back with Ted Lynch here on 100 Huntley Street. Back with Ted Lynch. Him and a friend broke into a college, arrested. Now you're in a jail cell in Woodstock, New Brunswick. What were you thinking?
I was totally humiliated with what I had done. It was Mother's Day. I woke up on a cement slab, covered in my own urine. And that was me. That was me. This guy right here. I was a mess.
How old were you at that time?
I was 20 years old.
Okay.
So I remember there was a black penny on the slab of cement, and I remember I looked at it and it was tails, and I was just like, I got to change my life. And I remember I took the penny and I flipped it over to heads. And I just left it there. Anyway, when I went to, I was sentenced, and the last night I was in there, there was a guy doing prison ministry. And
how long were you sentenced for?
I was only sentenced for 2 months, because it was the
first offender time, yeah.
Yeah, although there was lots of other things.
Yeah.
But, this time was
got away with most
first
of it.
time as an adult. So anyway, the last night I was in there, Pastor Ed Seeley from New Brunswick was doing prison ministry, and told a sermon just like it was this morning, and about living the horizontal life. And he said, have you been reaching out for sex? Have you been reaching out for drugs, reaching out for alcohol? Have you been reaching out for popularity? Have you been reaching out for money or fame or whatever? And I was sitting there feeling like, yeah, I feel like I've attempted to try those things. And he said, has it left you empty? And I kind of looked around and I thought, well, look where I am. And he said, well, maybe it's time, instead of living the horizontal life, to start living the vertical life. Instead of reaching out, to reach up and get a hold of something that will get a hold of you. And it got a hold of me.
Wow.
I found myself at the front of that room inviting Jesus into my heart, because he said that I could have a brand new start. And I needed that.
One of the things that you were able to do, we talked about earlier, is with your father. How were you able to forgive him and have that reconciliation with him?
I just believe that the love I was looking for in my father, he didn't have it to give me, because it wasn't given to him in that way. And the Holy Spirit began to show me the times where Dad did give me what he had. And I began to fall in love with my dad. And, you know, my dad was passing away, and I remember going in and, you know, washing his feet for him and washing his face. And I'd play my guitar for a couple hours for him. And you know, and it didn't have to be Father's Day. I remember stopping in the yard one day, and I said, Dad, I just want you to know that I love you. And my dad said, I love you too, Ted. And God restored a relationship. God's a mighty restorer.
He restored your life, and then you were able to have peace with your dad right up until the day he passed away. We're just about out of time. I know that you've had many experiences. You're a music guy. You write songs from the heart. You even had a situation where you lost your voice for a little while. You're making guitars. Music is a big part of your life now, Ted. Why is that?
We grew up with music, come from my mom's side of the family, the Williamses. They had a Williams choir, and you know, God spoke to me in church. I had stopped playing the guitar because I was, you know, playing it after the bars and at parties, and I had to sell my guitar, so, you know, people were coming to me, you know, I could drink for free and do drugs for free and everything that went along with that. So I got away from music, but I got back into it. God spoke to me and he said, Ted, I want you to get a guitar and I want you to start singing for me. And I did. I went out and bought a guitar and I started leading worship and writing songs. And the other scripture I got that sent me into ministry was the Lord said, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. And when I read that, he wasn't talking to Peter, he was talking to Ted Lynch. So I said, Lord, I'll go. And it just started from there. This is, I really believe in my heart, this is God-ordained ministry. I didn't start this, you know. I was playing a men's breakfast, and a fellow said, do you have a CD? And I said, no. And he said, why not? And you know, but I had prayed. I used to lay in bed and say, Lord, if it's possible, could I make a CD someday?
Well, you have made 3 CDs, Real Men, His Boots, and invade my soul, and God certainly has invaded your soul. And if you maybe can relate to Ted, maybe you're full of hate and anger, maybe for a parent or somebody that at one time you were close with. Well, God is there to soften our hearts as he did Ted's. And please know that we always have people standing by that would be willing to take your call. 1-866-273-4444. Prayer lines are always available to you. Thank you for sharing your story, Ted.
Thank you, Greg.
And we'll be right back.